In the middle of a billion-dollar investment meeting inside the glass tower of Cross Global headquarters, Yoon Tae-hyuk, a man whose real fortune is built on blood and fear, not stock portfolios, watches a woman collapse onto polished marble and instantly recognizes the bruises hidden beneath expensive makeup, the terror buried behind professional silence, and the predator disguised as a CEO standing 3 feet away pretending to care. The investment deal stops mattering the second Tae-hyuk realizes Elena Vale isn't exhausted. She's being destroyed. And Damien Roth just made the fatal mistake of hurting someone in front of a man who built an empire by never ignoring violence. If you want to see how a Korean mafia boss dismantles a billion-dollar company to save one woman everyone else ignored, stay with this story until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels across the world. The boardroom on the 43rd floor smelled like leather and desperation. Tae-hyuk could always smell desperation. It leaked from the pores of men pretending their empires weren't crumbling, from executives wearing suits worth more than most people's cars, while their quarterly reports bled red ink across every page. He sat at the far end of the table with his hands folded, posture relaxed, expression unreadable. To everyone else in the room, Yoon Tae-hyuk appeared exactly as his fabricated investment profile suggested. A wealthy Korean financier with deep pockets, international holdings, and an interest in American tech acquisitions. The kind of investor desperate companies fought over like starving dogs. They had no idea the money funding his legitimate businesses came from cigarette smuggling, underground gambling networks, and port operations that moved everything from stolen luxury cars to pharmaceutical-grade narcotics across 3 countries. They saw polished shoes and a tailored suit. They didn't see the violence. That was always the advantage. Damien Roth stood at the head of the table, mid-pitch, gesturing toward projected graphs that promised growth no sane analyst would believe. He had that specific brand of American arrogance Tae-hyuk had learned to recognize instantly. The kind that came from never being told no, never facing real consequences, never understanding that money and charm eventually stopped working when you pushed too far. Cross Global isn't just another tech company, Damien said, his voice smooth, rehearsed. We're positioned to dominate cloud infrastructure across the entire Asia-Pacific region within 18 months. The partnerships are already in place. We just need the right capital injection to scale. Tae-hyuk said nothing. He watched. Around the table, 6 other executives nodded along like trained animals. CFO, COO, VP of operations, titles that meant nothing when the company's foundation was rotting. Tae-hyuk's people had already run the real numbers. Cross Global was bleeding money, covering losses with creative accounting, and about 6 months away from either bankruptcy or federal investigation, probably both. But that wasn't why Tae-hyuk agreed to this meeting. His attention drifted past Damien toward the woman standing near the corner of the room, almost invisible, despite being the only person not seated. She wore a gray blouse and black slacks, hair pulled back tight. No jewelry, minimal makeup. Executive assistant, according to the briefing file. Elena Vale, 28 years old, no criminal record, no social media presence, no life outside this building, based on the surveillance reports. She held a tablet against her chest and stared at the floor. Tae-hyuk noticed the makeup first. It was good work, professional, carefully applied. But he'd spent 15 years learning to spot the things people tried to hide. The faint discoloration along her left cheekbone, the way the foundation sat slightly thicker near her jawline, the long sleeves despite the temperature inside the building hovering near 75 degrees. Then he noticed her breathing. Shallow, controlled. The kind of breathing that came from someone trying very hard not to be noticed. Damien snapped his fingers without looking at her. Elena, pull up the Q3 projections. She flinched. It was subtle. Most people probably missed it, but Tae-hyuk saw the microtension ripple through her shoulders, the way her grip tightened on the tablet before she moved. Yes, sir, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. She crossed toward the presentation screen and Tae-hyuk watched her walk. Careful steps. Measured, like someone navigating a minefield. When she reached the screen, her hands trembled slightly as she swiped through the files. Faster, Damien said, irritation creeping into his tone. We don't have all day. I'm sorry, Elena whispered. The file is, I don't want excuses, just do your job. The other executives shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Complicity through silence. Taehyuk had seen it 1,000 times in his own world. People who witnessed cruelty and chose comfort over confrontation. Elena finally pulled up the projections. Damien continued talking, his voice filling the room again, but Taehyuk wasn't listening anymore. He was watching the way Elena stood frozen near the screen, staring at nothing, her chest rising and falling too quickly. Then she swayed. It happened fast. One moment she was standing, the next, her knees buckled and she collapsed forward, the tablet clattering onto the floor as her body hit the carpet. Jesus Christ, one of the executives muttered. Damien sighed, annoyed, like she'd spilled coffee instead of losing consciousness. Someone get her out of here. Taehyuk was already moving. He crossed the room in 4 strides, dropped into a crouch beside her, and pressed 2 fingers against her neck to check her pulse. Steady, but fast. Her skin felt cold and clammy. Up close he could see the bruises more clearly now, faint purple shadows along her collarbone, another near her wrist where her sleeve had ridden up slightly. She's breathing, Taehyuk said, his voice calm. Call a doctor. Damien waved dismissively. She's fine, probably just skipped breakfast. This happens sometimes. Taehyuk looked up slowly, meeting Damien's eyes for the first time since entering the room. This happens sometimes? She's been under a lot of stress, Damien said, his tone casual, like they were discussing weather. Works too hard. I keep telling her to take breaks, but... He shrugged. You know how assistants are. Overcommitted. Taehyuk held his gaze for 3 long seconds, then looked back down at Elena. Her eyes were open now, unfocused, pupils dilated. She blinked slowly, trying to orient herself. Don't move, Taehyuk said softly in English, then switched to Korean for just 2 words. A habit, instinct. Gwenchana. It's okay. Elena stared at him, confusion flickering across her face. Behind them, Damien cleared his throat. Mr. Yoon, I appreciate your concern, but we really should continue the presentation. Elena can rest in her office. Taehyuk didn't respond. He carefully slid one arm beneath Elena's shoulders and helped her sit up. She was shaking now, trying to pull away from him, panic rising in her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean... You didn't do anything wrong, Taehyuk said quietly. She's embarrassed, Damien interjected, stepping closer. Elena, why don't you... Don't touch her. The words came out low, almost conversational, but every person in the room went still. Damien froze mid-reach, his hand hanging in the air. Excuse me? Taehyuk stood slowly, positioning himself between Damien and Elena. She needs medical attention. I'm taking her to a doctor. That's really not necessary. I wasn't asking. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. One of the executives coughed nervously. The CFO suddenly found his phone very interesting. Damien's expression shifted, irritation giving way to something colder, more calculated. Mr. Yoon, I understand you're trying to help, but Elena is my employee. I'll handle this. Taehyuk smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. No. I'm sorry? I said no. Taehyuk turned and crouched beside Elena again. Can you stand? She nodded shakily, and he helped her to her feet, keeping one hand steady on her elbow. Up close now he could see more, the exhaustion carved into her face, the hollowness in her eyes, the way she held herself like someone expecting to be hit. Taehyuk had seen that look before. In Seoul. In the brothels his organization shut down after taking over territory from rival gangs. In the faces of women trapped in situations where every exit was blocked and every choice led to pain. He knew exactly what he was looking at. My driver is downstairs, Taehyuk said gently. I'm going to take you to a private clinic. They'll check you over, make sure everything is okay. I can't, Elena stammered. I have work. Mr. Roth needs... Mr. Roth, Taehyuk said without looking away from her, will survive one afternoon without an assistant. Damien's jaw tightened. This is inappropriate. Taehyuk finally turned to face him fully. What's inappropriate, he said quietly, is letting someone collapse from exhaustion in your boardroom and calling it normal. The 2 men stared at each other. Taehyuk knew what Damien saw. An investor, a foreigner, someone who could be managed or manipulated or dismissed once the meeting ended. Damien had no idea he was looking at someone who'd ordered executions over breakfast and dismantled rival organizations before lunch. Fine, Damien said eventually, his voice tight. Take her to the doctor, but Elena... He looked past Tae-hyuk. We'll discuss this later. Elena's face went white. Tae-hyuk felt her arm tense beneath his hand. There's nothing to discuss, he said. She collapsed. It happens. No one is at fault. Of course, Damien replied, his smile returning cold and sharp. No one is at fault. Tae-hyuk guided Elena toward the door. Behind them, the CFO cleared his throat awkwardly. Should we reschedule the presentation? No need, Tae-hyuk said over his shoulder. I've seen enough. But, alright. The elevator ride down was silent except for Elena's unsteady breathing. She stood in the corner, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the floor. Tae-hyuk kept a respectful distance, watching the floor numbers descend. On the 37th floor, she finally spoke. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. He's going to be angry. Tae-hyuk looked at her. Let him be angry? Elena shook her head slowly. You don't understand. She stopped, catching herself. I shouldn't have said anything. You didn't say anything. I almost did. The elevator dinged. 29th floor. How long has he been hitting you? Tae-hyuk asked quietly. Elena's head snapped up, eyes wide with shock and fear. What? No, he doesn't. I never said. You didn't have to. Her mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Then her eyes filled with tears and she turned away sharply, pressing her palms against her face. I'm fine, she whispered. I'm fine. Everything is fine. No, Tae-hyuk said. It isn't. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor. Tae-hyuk stepped out first, then held the door and waited. Elena didn't move for several seconds. Then slowly, she walked out into the lobby. His driver was already waiting, a black sedan, windows tinted, engine running. The driver, a man named Jin Woo, who'd worked for Tae-hyuk's organization for 8 years and never asked unnecessary questions, opened the rear door without a word. Elena hesitated on the sidewalk. I should go back. You should see a doctor. Mr. Roth, Tae-hyuk interrupted gently, does not own you. Something cracked in her expression. For just a moment, the professional mask slipped completely, and Tae-hyuk saw raw, desperate hope underneath, the kind of hope that came from drowning and suddenly spotting land. Then she shook her head, and the mask returned. You don't know what you're talking about. Maybe. Tae-hyuk opened the car door wider. But I know what I saw. Elena stared at the open door like it was a trap. Finally, she got in. The clinic was in a renovated brownstone in a quiet neighborhood 40 minutes from Cross Global's headquarters. Tae-hyuk used it occasionally for his men when they needed medical attention without the questions that came with emergency rooms. The doctor, an older Korean woman named Dr. Lim, asked nothing she didn't need to know and documented even less. She examined Elena in a private room while Tae-hyuk waited outside in the hallway, reading through emails on his phone that required immediate attention. A shipment delayed at the port, a territorial dispute brewing in Incheon, a police captain in Seoul asking for an increased monthly payment, business as usual. 20 minutes later, Dr. Lim emerged, closing the door softly behind her. She looked tired. Well? Tae-hyuk asked in Korean. Severe exhaustion, mild dehydration, signs of chronic stress. Dr. Lim paused. An extensive bruising consistent with repeated physical trauma, defensive wounds on her forearms, old fractures in her left wrist that healed improperly, probably 6 months ago. Tae-hyuk's expression didn't change. How long? Years, I'd guess. The psychological damage is significant. She's terrified. Of me? Of everything. Dr. Lim pulled off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Whatever she's living through, it's been going on a long time. She needs help. Real help. Therapy, legal intervention, protection. I'll handle it. Dr. Lim gave him a look. Tae-hyuk, I don't know what you're planning, but I said I'll handle it. She sighed. She's resting now. I gave her something to help her sleep. She should stay here overnight for observation. Taehyuk nodded. Keep her here as long as necessary. Send me the bill. It's not about the bill. I know. Dr. Lim studied his face for a moment, then shook her head slowly. Be careful. Men like you always think you can fix things with money or force. Sometimes the damage is too deep. I'm not trying to fix anything, Taehyuk said quietly. I'm just making sure she doesn't go back. He returned to his office at midnight. The building, a legitimate holding company that served as the public face of his operations, was empty except for security. Taehyuk took the elevator to the top floor, walked into his private office, and locked the door behind him. Then he made a phone call. Hyung, a voice answered in Korean. Park Min-jae, his second in command, a man Taehyuk had known since they were teenagers running protection rackets in Gangnam. You're back early. The meeting was interesting, Taehyuk said. I need you to pull everything we have on Cross Global and Damien Roth. Financial records, personal background, property holdings, known associates, everything. Looking for leverage? Looking for evidence. There was a pause. What kind of evidence? The kind that puts him in a cell for the rest of his life. Min-jae whistled low. That bad? Worse. Understood. Give me 48 hours. Taehyuk hung up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. 43 stories below, people moved through their lives completely unaware that empires rose and fell in rooms exactly like this one. That decisions made over whiskey and encrypted phone calls shaped everything from stock prices to survival. He thought about Elena's face in the elevator, the fear, the resignation, the way she'd apologized for collapsing like it was a moral failing instead of a medical emergency. He thought about Damien Roth's dismissive tone, the casual cruelty, the smile that never reached his eyes. And he thought about the bruises. Taehyuk had built his organization on 3 principles: loyalty, control, and precision. He didn't act impulsively. He didn't make emotional decisions. He calculated risk, anticipated consequences, and moved only when victory was certain. But sometimes calculation wasn't enough. Sometimes you saw something that required a response regardless of risk. He pulled out his phone and sent a single text message to Min-jae. Make it 48 hours for the financial records. I want everything on his personal life by tomorrow morning. The response came back immediately. Understood. Taehyuk slipped the phone back into his pocket and stared out at the glowing city skyline. Somewhere out there, Elena was sleeping in a clinic bed, probably dreaming nightmares about returning to Cross Global, about Damien Roth's anger, about whatever punishment waited for her when she walked back into that glass tower. She wouldn't be walking back. Taehyuk would make sure of that, because he'd spent 15 years learning that the world was divided into 2 types of people, those who wielded power and those who suffered under it. And he'd decided a long time ago which side he belonged on. He just hadn't decided until today that sometimes you had to destroy someone on your own side to protect someone on the other. Elena woke at 3 in the morning in a room she didn't recognize. Panic hit immediately. White walls, unfamiliar ceiling, medical equipment beeping softly nearby. She tried to sit up and her body screamed in protest, every muscle aching like she'd been hit by a truck. Then memory returned in fragments. The boardroom. Collapsing. The Korean investor with cold eyes and a gentle voice. The car ride. The doctor. She was in a clinic. She was safe. That thought felt so foreign it took several seconds to process. When was the last time she'd felt safe? Years ago. Back when her mother was healthy and her job at Cross Global still seemed like an opportunity instead of a prison sentence. Back before Damien. Elena closed her eyes and tried to breathe through the rising anxiety. She needed to call him, apologize, explain, make sure he wasn't angry, wasn't planning something, wasn't... Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She grabbed it with shaking hands. 3 missed calls from Damien, 7 text messages. Where are you? Elena, answer your phone. This is unacceptable. We need to talk about what happened today. You embarrassed me in front of a major investor. Don't make this worse than it already is. Call me. Now. Elena felt her chest tighten. She knew that tone, the careful control barely hiding rage underneath. She'd heard it 100 times right before he'd backed her against a wall or grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave marks, or pushed her into his office and locked the door while explaining in that calm, reasonable voice why everything was her fault. She started typing a response, then stopped. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't hit the right keys. A soft knock interrupted. The door opened and Dr. Lim stepped inside, holding a cup of tea. "You're awake," she said gently in accented English. "How do you feel?" I'm fine. I should go. I have work tomorrow, and you're not going anywhere tonight." Dr. Lim set the tea down on the nightstand. "Doctor's orders." "My boss needs me." "Your boss," Dr. Lim said, her voice suddenly sharp, "is not my concern. Your health is. And right now your body is telling me you haven't rested properly in months." Elena looked away. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Dr. Lim pulled up a chair and sat down, her expression softening. "Elena, I've been doing this work a long time. I know what abuse looks like." Elena's breath caught. "I don't know what you're—" "Yes, you do." Silence stretched between them. Elena felt tears building behind her eyes and fought desperately to keep them contained. If she started crying, she wouldn't stop. If she admitted the truth out loud, everything would become real, and she'd have to face decisions she wasn't strong enough to make. "I can't leave," she finally whispered. "My mother, she's sick. The medical bills. Damien pays for everything. If I leave, she dies." Dr. Lim reached over and took her hand gently. "There are other ways, shelters, legal aid, medical assistance programs. You don't understand." Elena pulled her hand back. "He's powerful. He has money, lawyers, connections. If I try to leave, he'll destroy me. He's told me that. He's promised me that." "Then you need someone more powerful." Elena laughed bitterly. "Like who?" "Like Mr. Yoon." The name hung in the air. Elena thought about the man in the boardroom, the way he'd looked at her with those unreadable dark eyes, the way he'd stood between her and Damien without hesitation. "He's just an investor," Elena said quietly. "He doesn't care. Nobody cares." "He cares enough to bring you here." He was being polite. "No," Dr. Lim said. "He was being protective. There's a difference." Elena didn't respond. She stared at her phone, at Damien's messages still glowing on the screen, and felt the familiar weight of helplessness settle over her like a blanket soaked in ice water. Dr. Lim stood. "Rest. We'll talk more in the morning." She paused at the door. "And Elena? Whatever you decide, you don't have to face it alone." Then she left, closing the door softly behind her. Elena lay back against the pillows, phone still clutched in her hand, and stared at the ceiling. In her mind, she was already back in the tower, riding the elevator to the 43rd floor, walking into Damien's office, and enduring whatever punishment he'd decided she deserved. Because that's what she always did. Because she didn't know how to do anything else. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Damien. "Last chance, Elena. Call me by morning, or I'm coming to find you." She closed her eyes and felt a single tear slide down her cheek. Outside in the dark city, Yoon Tae-hyuk was making phone calls that would reshape everything Elena thought was inevitable. Because while she lay in that clinic bed accepting her fate, he was busy dismantling the foundations of Damien Roth's entire world. And neither of them knew yet that salvation sometimes came wearing a tailored suit and carrying the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself, the kind that just acted. Morning came with the kind of gray light that made everything look washed out and dead. Elena woke to find herself still in the clinic, still wearing yesterday's clothes, still holding her phone like a lifeline to a world she both feared and couldn't escape. She had 17 new messages from Damien. She didn't read them. She already knew what they said. Variations on the same theme: anger wrapped in concern, threats disguised as worry, manipulation packaged as care. He was a master at it. Years of practice had taught him exactly which words to use, which tone to strike, how to make her feel like the villain in a story where she was clearly the victim. Dr. Lim brought breakfast at 7, toast, eggs, orange juice. Elena stared at the plate without touching it. "You need to eat," Dr. Lim said. "I need to leave." "Not yet." "I have to go back to work." "No," Dr. Lim said firmly. "You have to recover. There's a difference." Elena looked up at her, exhaustion carved into every line of her face. "You don't understand what he'll do if I don't show up." "Then tell me." The words stuck in Elena's throat. How did you explain years of systematic destruction to someone who'd never lived it? How did you describe the way Damien had slowly isolated her from friends, from family, from anyone who might notice what was happening? How he'd convinced her that her mother's medical bills were a personal favor instead of basic insurance coverage? How he'd made every act of cruelty feel like her fault? He owns me, Elena finally whispered. That's what you need to understand. I signed a contract. I took his money. I let him. She stopped, unable to finish. Dr. Lim sat down on the edge of the bed. You didn't let him do anything. He did it to you. There's a difference. The law won't see it that way. Maybe. Maybe not. Dr. Lim paused. But Mr. Yoon might. Elena shook her head. He's a stranger. He doesn't owe me anything. He seems to think he does. Before Elena could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. Dr. Lim stood and opened it. Tae Hyuk stood in the hallway wearing a different suit than yesterday. Charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, no tie. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes found Elena's immediately. How is she? He asked Dr. Lim in Korean. Physically stable, emotionally fragile, she wants to leave. I know. Taehyuk switched to English and looked at Elena. Can I come in? Elena wanted to say no. Wanted to tell him to leave, to forget he'd ever seen her collapse in that boardroom, to go back to his billion-dollar deals and his perfect life and leave her to handle her own mess. But something in his expression stopped her. He didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her like she was a problem he intended to solve. Okay, she said quietly. Taehyuk entered, and Dr. Lim excused herself, closing the door behind her. He didn't sit, just stood near the window with his hands in his pockets, maintaining a careful distance that felt deliberate. Your boss has been calling the clinic, he said. 7 times since midnight. Elena's stomach dropped. What did you tell him? Nothing. I had the calls blocked. You can't do that. He'll what? Taehyuk's voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was steel underneath. Come here? Force you to leave? In front of witnesses and security cameras? You don't know him. No, but I know men like him. Tae Hyuk finally moved, pulling up the chair Dr. Lim had used earlier and sitting down. I've dealt with them my entire life. They operate on fear and control. Take away both, and they collapse. Elena stared at him. Who are you? An investor. Bullshit. The word came out harsher than she intended. Investors don't block phone calls. They don't take unconscious employees to private clinics. They don't... She gestured vaguely. Whatever this is. Taehyuk smiled slightly. You're right. They don't. So what do you want from me? Nothing. Everyone wants something. Not from you. Elena felt tears building again and hated herself for it. She'd spent years learning not to cry in front of Damien because tears only made things worse. But sitting here in this quiet room with this strange man who looked at her like she mattered, it was breaking something inside her that she'd worked very hard to keep frozen. I don't understand, she whispered. I know. Why are you helping me? Taehyuk was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. Because no one helped me when I needed it, and I've spent 15 years wishing someone had. Elena searched his face for deception and found none. Just exhaustion and something that looked like old anger buried deep. What happened to you? She asked. That's not important right now. He leaned forward slightly. What's important is what happens next. You have choices, Elena. Maybe not good ones, but choices. Like what? Like staying here until you're strong enough to think clearly. Like letting me help you find legal representation. Like... He paused. Like not going back to Cross Global. Elena laughed bitterly. I can't just quit. I have responsibilities. My mother... is being cared for at St. Catherine's Medical Center? Taehyuk interrupted. I had my people check. Her insurance is through Cross Global's corporate plan, which is required by law regardless of your employment status. Damien lied to you about that. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. What? Your mother's care doesn't depend on you staying. It never did. He made you think it did. Elena felt the room tilt. She gripped the edge of the bed, trying to process information that fundamentally changed everything she'd believed for 3 years. That's not, he said. He lied. Tae-hyuk's voice remained steady. He lied about a lot of things, and I can prove it. How? Because I had people investigate him last night. Tae-hyuk pulled out his phone and scrolled through something. Damien Roth, 42 years old, CEO of Cross Global for 6 years, MBA from Wharton, married twice, divorced twice, no children. Current net worth approximately $200 million, most of it tied up in company stock. He looked up. He's also being investigated by the SEC for securities fraud. Did you know that? Elena's head was spinning. No. He's been hiding it well, using shell companies to inflate revenue numbers, moving money between accounts to create the appearance of profitability. Cross Global is bleeding cash and he's been covering it up for 18 months. Tae-hyuk put the phone away. The company is going to collapse, probably within 6 months, and when it does, everyone connected to it is going to face consequences, including me. Not if you cooperate with investigators first. Elena stared at him. You're asking me to testify against him. I'm asking you to tell the truth. He'll destroy me. He's already destroying you, Tae-hyuk said quietly. This way, at least you have a chance to fight back. Elena closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids, she saw Damien's face, the smile that never reached his eyes, the hand that gripped too tight, the voice that turned cold whenever she displeased him. She saw the office with its locked door, the elevator rides where he stood too close, the late nights when everyone else had gone home and she was trapped alone with him in that glass tower. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You are. How do you know? Tae-hyuk stood and walked to the door. Before opening it, he looked back at her. Because you're still alive. That takes more strength than most people have. Then he left, and Elena was alone again with her phone and her fear and a choice she'd never imagined she'd have to make. Across the city, as the glass tower of Cross Global, Damien Roth sat in his office and systematically destroyed everything within reach. He'd started with the coffee mug, then the desk lamp, then the laptop, which now lay in pieces across the carpet like technological shrapnel. His assistant, his new assistant, a nervous 23-year-old named Bradley, who'd been hired yesterday after Elena's collapse, stood frozen in the doorway, too terrified to move. Get out, Damien said, his voice deadly calm. Bradley fled. Damien stood at the window, breathing hard, trying to regain control. He'd built an empire on control. Control of information, control of people, control of narratives. And in less than 24 hours, some Korean investor with too much money and too much curiosity had threatened to unravel everything. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. Mr. Roth? A woman's voice, professional, clipped. This is Jennifer Park from the Securities and Exchange Commission. We need to schedule a time to discuss some irregularities in Cross Global's recent financial filings. Damien's blood went cold. I'm sorry, what irregularities? It would be better to discuss this in person. Are you available Thursday at 10? I'll need to check my calendar. Thursday at 10, Jennifer Park repeated, and it wasn't a question this time. Bring your legal counsel. The line went dead. Damien stood very still, phone still pressed to his ear, and felt his carefully constructed world begin to crack. Someone had talked. Someone had given the SEC enough evidence to start asking questions. And he had a very good idea who. He dialed Elena's number for the 18th time. It went straight to voicemail again. Elena, he said, forcing warmth into his voice. I'm worried about you. We need to talk about what happened yesterday. I know you're scared, but running away isn't the answer. Come back to the office. We'll figure this out together. I promise nothing bad will happen. I just want to help you. He hung up and immediately made another call. This one to Marcus Chen, his head of security. I need you to find someone, Damien said. Elena Vale, she's been missing since yesterday. Check hospitals, clinics, hotels. I want her location within the hour. Is she in danger? Marcus asked. Yes, Damien said. From herself. She's unstable, needs help. I'm concerned she might do something reckless. It was a lie wrapped in just enough truth to sound believable. Marcus had been with the company for 4 years and knew better than to ask follow-up questions. I'll start looking, Marcus said. Damien ended the call and returned to the window. 43 stories below, the city moved through its morning rhythm. Cars, pedestrians, delivery trucks, all those insignificant lives unaware that above them, an empire was teetering on the edge. He'd worked too hard to lose it now. Built too much. Sacrificed too much. And if Elena thought she could just disappear with some foreign investor and destroy everything he'd created, she was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. But Taehyuk spent the morning in his office making the kind of calls that couldn't be traced, the kind that moved money through dark channels and activated networks that didn't appear on any organizational chart. "Hyung," Min-jae said over the encrypted line, "we have a problem." "Tell me." Damien Roth hired a private security firm to find the girl. They're checking hospitals and clinics. It's only a matter of time before they find Dr. Lim's place. Taehyuk had expected this. Men like Damien didn't let assets slip away quietly. How much time? Maybe 6 hours, maybe less. Move her. Where? Taehyuk thought for a moment. The safe house in Gramercy, the one we use for witnesses. That's a big step, Hyung. If she's there, we're committing to full protection. I know. You're starting a war over a woman you met yesterday. I'm starting a war over the right thing, Taehyuk corrected. There's a difference, Min-jae sighed. You're the boss, but Damien Roth has connections. He's going to push back hard. Let him push. And if this affects our legitimate operations, Cross Global was supposed to be a clean acquisition. Now you're burning that bridge. The bridge was already burning, Taehyuk said. I'm just controlling the fire. He hung up and stared at the papers spread across his desk. Financial records, background checks, police reports that had been buried under enough legal pressure to stay invisible for years. His people had worked through the night, and what they'd uncovered was worse than he'd expected. Damien wasn't just abusive, he was systematic about it. 3 previous assistants, all women, all disappeared from the company under mysterious circumstances. One had taken a settlement and signed an NDA. Another had simply quit and moved to another state. The third had tried to file charges, but the case had been dropped due to insufficient evidence after Damien's lawyers applied appropriate pressure. Elena was just the latest victim in a pattern that had been running for years. Taehyuk's phone buzzed. Dr. Lim. She's refusing to leave, Dr. Lim said without preamble. Says she needs to go back to work. Says she's fine. She's not fine. I know that. You know that. She doesn't believe it. Taehyuk stood and grabbed his jacket. I'm coming over. Bang. He found Elena in the clinic lobby, fully dressed, phone in hand, looking like she was about to bolt. She saw him enter and her expression shifted from determination to something closer to guilt. I have to go back, she said before he could speak. No, you don't. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Taehyuk stopped a few feet away. You're scared. You think going back is safer than fighting. You've convinced yourself that if you just apologize enough, comply enough, disappear enough, maybe he'll stop hurting you. Elena's face went pale. That's not... It is. His voice stayed gentle despite the hard truth. And it's a lie. Men like Damien don't stop. They escalate. And eventually one of 2 things happens. Either you disappear completely or you end up dead. You're being dramatic. Am I? Taehyuk pulled out his phone and held it up, showing her a photo. This is Sarah Mitchell. She was Damien's assistant 4 years ago. She quit suddenly, moved to Portland, and hasn't spoken to anyone from Cross Global since. Want to know why? Elena stared at the photo, a young woman with dark hair and tired eyes. Because he put her in the hospital twice, Taehyuk continued. Broken ribs the first time. Concussion the second. She took a settlement of $50,000 and signed paperwork promising never to discuss it. She was 26 years old. Elena's hands were shaking. How do you know this? Because I have people who find things. He put the phone away. You're not the first, Elena. You're just the first one he's hurt in front of someone who decided to care. Why? The word came out raw, desperate. Why do you care? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Taehyuk was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, weighted with something that sounded like old pain. When I was 17, I watched someone get beaten to death in an alley in Seoul. 5 men, 1 victim. It took 12 minutes. I was hiding behind a dumpster, too scared to move, too terrified to help. When it was over, I went home and never told anyone what I saw. Elena's breath caught. For years, I convinced myself there was nothing I could have done, Tae Hyuk continued. That I was just a kid, that getting involved would have only gotten me killed too. But the truth is simpler. I was a coward, and that man died because I chose my own safety over his life. He met her eyes. I can't undo that, but I can make sure it doesn't happen again. Not to you. Not while I'm in a position to stop it. Elena felt tears streaming down her face and didn't bother to wipe them away. I don't know how to be brave. You don't have to be brave. You just have to be willing. Willing to what? To let someone help you. The words hung between them. Elena looked down at her phone, at the 17 unread messages from Damien, at the life she'd been living for 3 years that had slowly eroded everything good inside her, until all that remained was fear and exhaustion. If I do this, she said slowly, if I let you help me, what happens to my mother? She stays in St. Catharines with full medical coverage. I'll make sure of it personally. And my job? You don't need it. I'll cover your expenses until you find something else. I can't let you do that. Yes, you can. Elena closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids, she saw 2 paths stretching out in opposite directions. One led back to the glass tower, to Damien's office, to locked doors and broken promises. The other led somewhere she couldn't see yet, dark, uncertain, terrifying in completely different ways. He's going to come looking for me, she whispered. I know. He's going to be angry. I'm counting on it. Elena opened her eyes and looked at him. You want him to come after me? I want him to try, Tae-hyuk said, so I can show him what happens when you threaten someone under my protection. The words should have sounded arrogant. Instead, they sounded like a promise. Elena took a shaky breath. Okay? Okay. I'll let you help me. She paused. But I want to understand something first. You're not just an investor, are you? Tae-hyuk smiled slightly. No? What are you? Someone who knows how to win fights that don't follow normal rules. It wasn't a real answer, but Elena found herself nodding anyway. Because right now, she didn't need normal rules. She needed someone who could operate outside them. There's a safe house, Tae-hyuk said, in Gramercy. It's secure, private. You'll stay there until we figure out the next steps. How long? As long as it takes. And then you testify against him. You tell federal investigators everything you know about Cross Global's finances, about Damien's behavior, about the abuse, and you help put him away for a very long time. Elena felt her stomach twist. That's a lot. I know. I don't know if I can do it. You can. Tae-hyuk stepped closer. And you won't be alone. I'll make sure you have lawyers, protection, everything you need. But you have to decide now, Elena. Because once we move you, there's no going back. You'll be safe, but you'll also be committed to seeing this through. Elena thought about Sarah Mitchell, broken ribs and a concussion, and $50,000 that probably didn't even cover the medical bills. She thought about the other assistants, the ones who disappeared into silence and settlements and fear. She thought about her mother, dying slowly in a hospital bed, completely unaware that her daughter had been trapped in hell for years. And she thought about herself, about the woman she used to be before Damien, before the glass tower, before she'd learned to make herself small and quiet and invisible. Okay, she said again, stronger this time. Let's do it. Tae-hyuk nodded once. Pack whatever you need. We leave in 20 minutes. They took the back exit. Tae-hyuk had Jin-woo bring the car around to the service alley, and they left through the clinic's delivery entrance like criminals fleeing a crime scene. Maybe that's exactly what they were. Elena sat in the back seat with a small bag containing the few possessions she'd had at the clinic. Her phone, her wallet, a change of clothes Dr. Lim had provided. Everything else was still at her apartment, including 3 years of memories she suddenly realized she didn't want anymore. What about my things? She asked. I'll have someone collect them, Tae-hyuk said from the front passenger seat. Once it's safe. When will that be? When Damien Roth is in custody. Elena leaned her head against the window and watched the city slide past. Morning rush hour was in full swing. People heading to offices, to coffee shops, to lives that didn't include running from abusive bosses with the help of mysterious Korean investors who had secrets in their eyes. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. Another message from Damien. Last chance, Elena. Come back by noon or I'm filing a police report. Missing person, mental health crisis. I'll say you're a danger to yourself. They'll find you. And when they do, you'll have to explain why you disappeared with a stranger. Her hands started shaking again. Let me see, Tae-hyuk said quietly. Elena handed him the phone. He read the message, his expression unchanging, then passed it back. He's bluffing, Tae-hyuk said. How do you know? Because filing a police report means answering questions. And right now, the last thing Damien wants is police asking questions about his relationship with you. But what if he does anyway? Then we'll handle it. Tae-hyuk turned slightly in his seat to look at her. Elena, you need to understand something. From this point forward, everything Damien does will be reactive. He's not in control anymore. You are. You just have to trust that. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the power he was describing, but all she felt was terrified. They drove in silence for another 10 minutes before pulling into an underground parking garage beneath a converted brownstone in Gramercy. Jinwoo parked in a reserved spot and killed the engine. Nobody moved for several seconds. This is it, Tae-hyuk finally said. Last chance to change your mind. Elena looked around the dark garage, at the concrete pillars and security cameras and exit signs glowing faintly in the shadows. This was the point of no return. Once she stepped out of this car, once she entered that building, she'd be choosing a side, choosing to fight instead of surrender, choosing to become someone Damien couldn't control anymore. I'm not changing my mind, she said. Tae-hyuk nodded and got out. Jinwoo opened Elena's door, and she stepped into the cool garage air, her legs unsteady but holding. They took an elevator to the 3rd floor. The hallway was quiet, carpeted, lined with doors that all looked identical. Tae-hyuk stopped at 3C and unlocked it with a keycard. The apartment inside was small but clean. Living room, kitchenette, bedroom, bathroom. Windows overlooking the street, blinds already drawn. Furniture that looked expensive but impersonal, like a hotel suite. You'll be safe here, Tae-hyuk said. There's food in the kitchen, clothes in the bedroom closet that should fit. Security is 24 hours. No one gets in without clearance. Elena walked to the center of the living room and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. How long have you had this place? 5 years? For what? People who need to disappear for a while. What kind of people? Tae-hyuk met her eyes. The kind worth protecting. Elena wanted to ask more questions. Who he really was, what he really did, why he had safe houses and security teams, and the kind of resources that could make people vanish. But she was suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had been carrying her through the last 24 hours drained away all at once, leaving her hollow. I need to sleep, she said. Bedroom's through there. Tae-hyuk gestured. I'll be across the hall in 3D if you need anything. Jinwoo will be in the lobby. Elena nodded and walked toward the bedroom. At the door, she stopped and looked back. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Tae-hyuk said quietly. This is just the beginning. Elena woke 6 hours later to darkness and confusion. For several terrifying seconds, she didn't know where she was. Strange bed, strange room, strange silence. Then memory returned and she felt her chest tighten. She was in hiding. She was running from Damien. She had chosen to fight. The thought felt surreal. Elena Vale, who'd spent 3 years learning to be invisible, was suddenly at the center of something that felt like war. She got up and walked to the living room. Tae-hyuk sat on the couch with a laptop, still wearing the same suit from this morning, looking like he hadn't moved in 6 hours. You're still here, Elena said. He looked up. I wanted to make sure you were okay. I'm fine. You're not, but you will be. Elena sat down on the opposite end of the couch, pulling her knees up to her chest. What happens now? Now, we build a case. Tae-hyuk closed the laptop. My lawyers will contact you tomorrow. They'll start the process of gathering evidence, documentation, witness statements, everything we need to make charges stick. And Damien is currently trying to figure out where you went. Tae-hyuk's expression darkened. He's hired private investigators, filed a missing person report claiming you're mentally unstable, Called your mother's hospital, pretending to be concerned. Elena felt sick. He talked to my mother? No, hospital security stopped him, but he tried. He's not going to stop. I know. Taehyuk leaned forward, which is why we need to move faster than he does. Tomorrow morning, you're meeting with federal investigators from the SEC. They're already looking into Cross Global's finances. Your testimony will give them everything they need to move forward with criminal charges. Elena's pulse quickened. Tomorrow? That's too soon. I'm not ready. You'll never feel ready, but you're capable. What if I forget something? What if I say the wrong thing? Then the lawyers will help you correct it. Elena, these people are professionals. They've handled cases like this before. They know what they're doing. But I don't. Taehyuk stood and walked to the window, pulling the blinds aside slightly to look out at the street. When I was 22, I had to testify against a man who'd been running protection rackets in my neighborhood. He'd beaten my best friend so badly, he ended up in a coma. I was terrified, convinced I'd say something wrong, get my family killed, make everything worse. What happened? I testified anyway, and the man went to prison for 15 years. He let the blinds fall closed again. Fear doesn't mean you're weak, Elena. It means you're human. But you can be afraid and still do what needs to be done. Elena wrapped her arms tighter around her knees. I don't feel human anymore. I feel like I've been erased. Like Damien spent 3 years deleting me piece by piece until there was nothing left. Then tomorrow, Taehyuk said quietly, you start rebuilding. They sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Ambulance, police, fire, impossible to tell. The city's endless soundtrack. Elena's phone buzzed. She picked it up and felt her blood freeze. The message was from an unknown number, but she knew immediately who'd sent it. I know where you are. I know who you're with. This ends badly for everyone if you don't come back. Final warning. Her hands started shaking so violently she almost dropped the phone. Taehyuk crossed the room in 2 strides and took it from her. He read the message, his expression hardening into something cold and dangerous. He's bluffing, Taehyuk said. How do you know? Because if he actually knew where you were, he'd already be here. He put the phone down. He's trying to scare you into making a mistake. It's working. I know. Which is exactly why you're not going to respond. Taehyuk pulled out his own phone and made a call. Min-jae, we need to move up the timeline. Contact the SEC investigators. Tell them we're ready for the meeting tonight instead of tomorrow morning. He listened for a moment, then said something sharp in Korean that Elena didn't understand but recognized as an order. Then he hung up and looked at her. Get dressed, he said. We're leaving in 30 minutes. Leaving? Where? Federal building in Manhattan. You're giving your statement tonight. Elena felt panic rising. I can't. I'm not ready. Yes, you are. Taehyuk's voice was firm, but not unkind. And the longer we wait, the more time Damien has to cover his tracks. This has to happen now. Elena stood on shaking legs, her mind racing. This was it. The point where everything changed, where she stopped being a victim and became a witness, where she stopped running and started fighting, where she stopped letting Damien Roth own her life. Okay, she whispered, let's do it. Taehyuk nodded once, and in that moment, Elena saw something shift in his expression, satisfaction mixed with something that looked almost like pride. Go get dressed, he said. I'll be waiting. Elena walked to the bedroom and closed the door behind her. She stood in the darkness for several seconds, breathing hard, trying to steady herself. Then she turned on the light and started getting ready to burn Damien Roth's empire to the ground. The federal building looked like every nightmare Elena had ever imagined about government bureaucracy. Gray concrete, fluorescent lighting, security checkpoints that made airports look welcoming. She sat in the back of Jinwoo's car, watching people in suits flow in and out through revolving doors, and felt her chest constrict. I can't do this, she said for the 4th time in 20 minutes. Taehyuk, seated beside her, didn't look away from his phone. Yes, you can. What if I freeze? What if I... You won't. He finally looked at her, his expression calm in a way that should have been reassuring, but somehow made everything feel more real. You're going to walk in there, sit down with 2 investigators, and tell them exactly what happened. That's all. That's all? Elena's laugh came out brittle. I'm about to accuse one of the most powerful men in New York of abuse and fraud. That's not nothing. No, it's everything. Taehyuk put his phone away, which is why it matters. Jinwoo pulled up to the entrance. Through the windshield, Elena could see two figures waiting near the security desk inside. A woman in a dark pantsuit and a man carrying a leather briefcase. The lawyers Taehyuk had promised. They looked efficient and expensive and completely out of her league. They're waiting for us, Taehyuk said. Elena's hands were shaking again. She pressed them flat against her thighs, trying to stop the tremors through sheer force of will. It didn't work. Nothing worked anymore. What if Damien finds out I'm here? He already knows you're talking to someone. This just makes it official. That's not reassuring. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be true. Taehyuk opened his door. Come on. Elena followed him out of the car and into the building. The security checkpoint felt like walking through a metal detector designed to scan for courage. She was certain she'd fail. But somehow she made it through, collected her belongings from the plastic bin, and found herself standing in a sterile lobby that smelled like disinfectant and desperation. The woman in the pantsuit approached. 40-something, sharp eyes, handshake like a vice grip. Ms. Vale, I'm Rebecca Torres, lead counsel for the SEC's investigation into Cross Global. This is my colleague, David Kim. David nodded, but didn't extend his hand. He looked tired, like he'd been working this case for months without sleep. Thank you for coming, Rebecca continued. I know this isn't easy. Elena wanted to laugh. Not easy. Like that phrase came close to describing the terror currently eating her alive from the inside out. Let's go upstairs, Rebecca said. We have a conference room reserved. They took an elevator to the 8th floor. Nobody spoke during the ride. Elena watched the numbers climb and felt each floor like a countdown to something irreversible. The conference room was exactly what she expected. Long table, uncomfortable chairs, recording equipment set up in the center, windows overlooking the city that somehow made everything feel smaller and more exposed at the same time. Two people were already seated at the table. A man in his 50s with gray hair and a woman maybe 10 years younger, both wearing the kind of serious expressions that suggested they'd heard every horrible story humanity had to offer and had stopped being surprised years ago. Ms. Vale, the man said, standing. I'm Special Agent Marcus Webb, SEC Division of Enforcement. This is Special Agent Linda Huang. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Elena sat down in this chair Rebecca indicated. Taehyuk took the seat beside her. The lawyers flanked them on either side like bodyguards made of legal degrees. Agent Webb pressed a button on the recording device. This interview is being recorded for investigative purposes. The date is November 19th, 2026. Time is 8:47 p.m. Present are Special Agents Webb and Huang, attorneys Rebecca Torres and David Kim, and witness Elena Marie Vale. He paused. Ms. Vale, you understand that you're here voluntarily? Yes, Elena said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. And you understand that any information you provide can be used in ongoing criminal investigations? Yes. Good. Agent Webb folded his hands on the table. Let's start with your employment at Cross Global. When did you begin working there? Elena took a breath. 3 years ago, August 22nd, 2023. And your position? Executive Assistant to the CEO, Damien Roth. How would you describe your working relationship with Mr. Roth? The question sat in the air like a bomb with a lit fuse. Elena felt everyone's eyes on her, the agents, the lawyers, Taehyuk, waiting for her to speak the truth she'd been burying for 3 years. Complicated, she finally said. Agent Huang leaned forward. Can you elaborate? Elena's throat felt like it was closing. She looked at Taehyuk, who gave her the smallest nod. You can do this. He was... She stopped, started again. At first it was professional, normal boss-employee relationship, but after about 6 months, things changed. Changed how? He started asking me to work late, alone, in his office. And then the door would lock and Elena's voice cracked. He'd stand too close, touch my shoulder, my back, make comments about my appearance, tell me I was special, that he trusted me more than anyone else. Agent Webb's expression didn't change. Did you report this behavior? To who? He was the CEO. HR reported to him. Did you document any of these incidents? No, I didn't think. Elena felt tears building. I needed the job. My mother was sick. The insurance, he told me the insurance was tied to my position, that if I quit, she'd lose coverage. Was that true? No. The word came out bitter. But I didn't know that until 2 days ago. Agent Huang made a note. When did the behavior escalate beyond verbal harassment? This was it. The moment where she had to say it out loud, make it real. Make it something that couldn't be taken back or explained away or buried under shame and silence. About a year after I started, Elena said quietly. I was working late. Everyone else had gone home. He came into his office and locked the door. I asked why, and he said we needed privacy to discuss something important. Then she couldn't look at anyone, stared at her hands instead. He grabbed my wrist, pulled me close, told me I'd been leading him on for months and it was time to stop playing games. Did he assault you? He tried. I pushed him away and he hit me across the face. Not hard enough to leave a mark, but hard enough that I understood what would happen if I fought back. The room was so quiet, Elena could hear the ventilation system humming in the walls. Did he assault you that night? Agent Webb asked again, his voice carefully neutral. No. But he made it clear that he could. That I belonged to him. That if I told anyone, no one would believe me. Elena's hands were shaking violently now. And then he apologized, said he'd had too much to drink, that it wouldn't happen again, gave me a raise and told me to take a few days off. But it did happen again. Yes, not the same way. He was calculated about it. Made sure there were never marks where people could see. Made sure I understood that my mother's health depended on my cooperation. Made sure I knew that if I left, he'd destroy me. Agent Huang set down her pen. Ms. Vale, I need to ask you something difficult. Did Damien Roth ever force you to engage in sexual activity against your will? Elena closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids, she saw Damien's office, the locked door, the late nights, the way he'd made every violation feel like her fault, like she'd somehow invited it, like she was complicit in her own destruction. Yes, she whispered. How many times? I don't know. I stopped counting after... Her voice broke completely. I'm sorry, I can't... Rebecca Torres put a gentle hand on her shoulder. Take your time. Elena pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the tears, but they came anyway. 3 years of silence breaking apart all at once. She felt Tae Hyuk's presence beside her, solid, unwavering, the only reason she hadn't bolted from the room yet. Can we take a break? Rebecca asked. Of course, Agent Webb said. He stopped the recording. Ms. Vale, you're doing very well. I know this is difficult. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. You said you were investigating financial crimes. Why are you asking about the other stuff? Because it's all connected, Agent Huang said. Damien Roth used his position of power to coerce you into silence about both the abuse and the financial irregularities you witnessed. That's criminal behavior on multiple fronts. What financial irregularities? Agent Webb exchanged a glance with his partner. That's actually what we need to discuss next. But first, do you need water? Coffee? Water, Elena managed. David Kim left and returned a minute later with a bottle. Elena drank half of it in one long gulp, trying to wash away the taste of 3 years of shame. Agent Webb restarted the recording and stated the time. Ms. Vale, during your employment at Cross Global, did you have access to confidential financial documents? Yes. I managed Damien's calendar, his correspondence, his files. I saw everything that crossed his desk. Did you ever notice irregularities in the company's financial reporting? Elena thought back to late nights in the office, to documents she'd filed without understanding their significance, to conversations she'd overheard between Damien and the CFO that had made her skin crawl. I didn't understand most of it, she said slowly. But yes, I noticed things. Like what? Revenue numbers that changed between drafts, money being moved between accounts for no clear reason, invoices for services that didn't exist. Damien would get angry if I asked questions, so I stopped asking. Agent Huang leaned forward. Do you still have access to any of these documents? No, Everything was on company servers. Did you ever make copies? Elena hesitated. She had, actually. Not intentionally, more out of paranoia than planning. She'd started backing up Damien's files to a personal drive after he'd blamed her for losing an important document that she knew he'd deleted himself, just in case he tried it again. Ms. Vale? Agent Webb prompted. I have a backup drive, Elena said quietly, at my apartment. It has copies of everything from the last 2 years. The agents exchanged looks that Elena couldn't quite read. Rebecca Torres went very still beside her. Everything? Agent Webb asked carefully. Everything that crossed my desk, emails, financial reports, internal memos. I wasn't trying to build a case. I was just protecting myself. Where's this drive now? In my apartment, hidden in a box of tampons under the bathroom sink. She almost smiled at the memory of choosing that hiding spot. Damien would never look there. We need that drive, Agent Huang said. It could be the evidence we need to... The conference room door opened. Everyone turned. A man in a security uniform stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, but there's someone downstairs demanding to see Miss Elena Vale. He's causing a scene and threatening to call his lawyers if we don't let him up. Elena's blood turned to ice. Who is it? But she already knew. Damien Roth, the security guard said. He says he's her employer and he's here to escort her home. The room exploded into motion. Rebecca Torres was on her feet immediately. Absolutely not. Ms. Vale is here voluntarily providing testimony. He has no legal right. He's claiming she's mentally unstable, the guard interrupted. Says she wandered off from a medical facility this morning and he's been trying to find her all day. He has paperwork. Elena felt the walls closing in. Of course, Damien had paperwork. He always had paperwork. He probably had a doctor's note declaring her incompetent, a legal order giving him medical custody, a dozen other documents that would paint her as crazy and him as concerned. That's a lie, she said, but her voice came out weak. Tae Hyuk stood. Where is he now? Lobby. Building security is keeping him contained, but he's threatening legal action if we don't produce Ms. Vale within the hour. Let him threaten, Agent Webb said. Ms. Vale is under federal protection as a witness in an ongoing investigation. No one is taking her anywhere. Does he know that? The guard asked. He's about to. Agent Webb left the room, Agent Huang close behind. Rebecca Torres turned to Elena. Did Damien have any reason to believe you'd be here tonight? I don't know, maybe. He sent a message earlier saying he knew where I was. He was bluffing, Tae Hyuk said. But he looked tense now, alert in a way that made Elena's fear spike higher. Rebecca's phone buzzed. She looked at it, and her expression darkened. We have another problem. What? Elena asked. Damien just filed an emergency petition in family court claiming you're a danger to yourself. He's requesting a psych hold. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. He can't do that. We're not family. He listed your mother as the basis for jurisdiction, Rebecca said, reading from her phone. Claims he's been acting as her healthcare proxy and that your current mental state poses a threat to her continued care. Elena felt the room spin. That's insane. It's calculated, David Kim said grimly. If a judge grants the petition, police can take you into custody for a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation, during which time any testimony you've given becomes suspect because you're officially considered mentally unstable. Can he actually do this? Elena looked at Tae Hyuk desperately. Can he just make me disappear like this? He can try, Tae Hyuk said, his voice hard. But he won't succeed. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Rebecca Torres was already typing rapidly on her phone. I'm filing an emergency countermotion, but we need that backup drive, Ms. Vale. If we have hard evidence of financial crimes, it strengthens your credibility as a witness and undermines any mental health claims. It's at my apartment. Can someone retrieve it? Elena looked at Tae Hyuk. He was already pulling out his phone. Jinwoo, he said in Korean, then switched to English. Go to Elena's apartment. Under the bathroom sink, box of tampons, there's a backup drive. Bring it here. He paused. And Jinwoo? Damien Roth probably has people watching the building. Be careful. He hung up and looked at Elena. We'll have it within an hour. What if Damien's people get there first? They won't. But Elena could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hand stayed close to his phone like he was expecting bad news. He was worried, which meant she should be terrified. Agent Webb returned looking grim. Building security is holding Roth in the lobby, but his lawyers are on their way. We have maybe 30 minutes before this becomes a jurisdictional nightmare. Then we finish the interview, Agent Huang said. She restarted the recording. Miss Vale, I need you to focus. You said you witnessed financial irregularities at Cross Global. Can you be more specific? Elena forced herself to concentrate. He'd have the CFO create 2 sets of books, one for investors, one for internal use. The numbers never matched. Revenue was always higher in the public documents. By how much? 30, sometimes 40%. Agent Huang whistled low. That's securities fraud. I know. I suspected, but I didn't know what to do about it. Did anyone else know? The CFO. Maybe the COO. I'm not sure who else. Would any of this be documented on the drive you mentioned? Yes, all of it. Emails between Damien and the CFO discussing the discrepancies. Memos about moving money between shell companies. Instructions on how to present the numbers to the board. Elena felt something shift inside her, fear giving way to anger. He was so careful about everything else, but he never thought I was smart enough to understand what I was seeing. That was his mistake, Agent Webb said. Rebecca Torres's phone buzzed again. She looked at it, and her expression went from grim to catastrophic. We have a problem. Another one? Elena asked weakly. Judge Martin granted Damien's emergency petition. Police are on their way here now to take you into custody for psychiatric evaluation. The room went silent. Elena felt her heart stop, then start again in a painful stutter rhythm that made breathing difficult. How is that possible? David Kim demanded. We filed the countermotion. Judge Martin has a reputation for rubber-stamping emergency petitions, especially when they come from wealthy, well-connected individuals with expensive lawyers. Rebecca looked at Elena. I'm sorry, this shouldn't be happening, but it is. So what do we do? Elena heard herself ask from somewhere far away. We fight it. But you're going to have to go with the police when they arrive. There's no other option. The hell there isn't, Taehyuk said, his voice cold enough to make everyone look at him. Mr. Yoon, Rebecca said carefully, I understand you want to protect Ms. Vale, but we're talking about a court order. If she resists, she's not resisting, she's leaving. That's the same thing. No, Taehyuk said. It's different. He stood and looked at Elena. Do you trust me? Elena stared at him. The question should have been simple, but trusting someone, really trusting them, meant surrendering control, meant believing they wouldn't hurt you the way everyone else had. And Elena had spent 3 years learning that trust was just another word for vulnerability. But looking at Taehyuk now, at the cold determination in his eyes, at the way he stood between her and the door like he'd physically fight anyone who tried to take her, she realized something important. She didn't have to trust him. She just had to be willing to bet her life that he was a better option than the alternative. Yes, she said. Taehyuk nodded once. Then we're leaving. Now. Mr. Yoon, Agent Webb said, standing, I can't let you obstruct. You're not letting me do anything. You're going to sit here and explain to the police that Ms. Vale stepped out to use the restroom 5 minutes before they arrived. By the time you finish that explanation, we'll be gone. That's aiding a fugitive. No, it's poor timing. Taehyuk looked at Rebecca Torres. How long until the police arrive? Rebecca hesitated, then checked her phone. 8 minutes. That's enough. He took Elena's hand and pulled her toward the door. She followed numbly, her brain still trying to process what was happening. They were running. She was about to become a fugitive from a court order issued by a judge who'd probably never even read the petition. This was insane. This was her only option. Wait, Agent Huang called out. If you run, it destroys your credibility. Everything you've told us tonight becomes worthless. Elena stopped, looked back. Then I guess I need to make sure you get that backup drive before Damien destroys it. We will, Agent Webb said. But Ms. Vale, if you disappear now, Damien wins. He gets to control the narrative, gets to say you're unstable, unreliable, a scorned employee making false accusations. He gets to say that anyway, Elena replied. and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. At least this way, I'm not locked in a psychiatric ward while he destroys evidence. She turned and followed Tae-hyuk out of the conference room. They took the stairs instead of the elevator, 8 flights down, Elena's legs burning by the time they hit the ground floor. Tae-hyuk checked his phone, typed something rapidly, then pulled her toward a side exit she hadn't noticed on the way in. Service entrance, he said. Jinwoo's bringing the car around. They burst through the door into a narrow alley that smelled like garbage and exhaust. Jinwoo's black sedan was already idling at the curb, engine running. They got in and Jinwoo pulled away from the building just as Elena heard sirens approaching from the opposite direction. "Did you get the drive?" Tae-hyuk asked in Korean. Jinwoo's response came fast and worried. Elena didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. "What?" she demanded. "What's wrong?" Tae-hyuk's expression went very still. "Your apartment was already empty when Jinwoo arrived. Someone cleared it out. Everything's gone." Elena felt her chest constrict. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "I mean empty. Furniture, clothes, personal items. All of it." "Including the drive?" "Including the drive." The words hit her like a freight train. Elena stared at Tae-hyuk, then out the window at the city sliding past, then back at Tae-hyuk, trying to make sense of something that made no sense at all. "How?" she whispered. "How did he know where it was?" "I don't know." "This was supposed to be safe. You said we'd get the evidence, and everything would be fine, and he'd go to prison, and—" Elena heard her voice rising, spiraling toward hysteria. "You promised." "I know. So what do we do now?" Tae-hyuk looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Elena saw something like uncertainty in his eyes. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but we'll figure it out." Elena pressed her hands over her face and felt her entire world collapse. No evidence, no testimony that would hold up in court now that she'd fled a psychiatric evaluation. No way to prove anything she'd said was true. Damien had won. He'd destroyed her completely, and she'd helped him do it by trusting a stranger with cold eyes and promises he couldn't keep. "I want to go see my mother," Elena said, her voice hollow. "That's not safe." "I don't care." "Elena, I want to see my mother," she said again, louder this time. "Right now, before whatever happens next." Tae-hyuk stared at her for a long moment, then said something to Jinwoo in Korean. The car changed direction. Elena leaned her head against the window and watched the city blur past through tears she couldn't stop anymore. Somewhere out there, Damien was probably celebrating, toasting his victory with expensive whiskey while she fell apart in the back of a car driven by a man who'd promised to save her and failed. She should have known better. She should have stayed invisible. She should have never believed that someone like her could fight someone like him and win. The hospital appeared through the windshield. St. Catherine's Medical Center, where her mother had been slowly dying for 2 years while Elena sold pieces of her soul to keep her alive. Jinwoo parked in the emergency lot, and Tae-hyuk said something that made him stay with the car. "I'll come with you," Tae-hyuk said to Elena. "No." Elena opened her door. "I need to do this alone." She walked into the hospital before he could argue, past the reception desk, toward the elevators that would take her to the 4th floor where her mother's room waited. The halls were quiet at this hour, just the beep of machines and the shuffle of night shift nurses moving between rooms. Elena stopped outside room 412 and took a breath. Then she pushed open the door. Her mother lay in his bed, eyes closed, breathing assisted by machines that beeped their steady rhythm. She'd been in a medically induced coma for 3 weeks now, complications from the cancer that had been eating her alive for 2 years. Elena walked to the bedside and took her mother's hand, feeling how thin it had become, how fragile. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered. "I'm so sorry. I tried to save you, and I just made everything worse." Her mother didn't respond. Couldn't respond. Would probably never respond again. Elena stood there holding her hand and feeling the weight of every failure pressing down on her chest until she couldn't breathe. Then she heard footsteps in the hallway. She turned just as Damien walked into the room. He looked exactly the same as always. Expensive suit, perfect hair, that smile that never reached his eyes. But there was something different now. something victorious. "Hello, Elena," he said softly. "I've been looking for you." Elena couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only stare as he closed the door behind him and locked it with a quiet click that sounded like the end of everything. "Did you really think you could run from me?" Damien asked, walking closer. "Did you really think some Korean investor could protect you better than I could destroy you?" "Stay away from me," Elena managed. "Or what? You'll call for help?" "Go ahead, try it." He pulled out his phone and held it up, showing her a document on the screen. "I have a court order giving me medical proxy over both you and your mother. As far as this hospital is concerned, I'm family, and you're a mentally unstable woman who needs to be returned to psychiatric care immediately." Elena backed against the wall. "You can't—" "I already did." Damien pocketed his phone. "You made a mistake, Elena, a very big mistake. You forgot who holds the power here. You forgot that I own you, and now you're going to learn exactly what happens when you try to take something that belongs to me." He reached for her, and Elena realized with perfect crystalline clarity that she had nowhere left to run. No evidence, no testimony, no help coming. Just her and Damien and a locked door, and 3 years of violence finally coming to their inevitable conclusion. She closed her eyes and waited for the impact, and wondered distantly if this was how her story had always been meant to end. Damien's hand was 6 inches from Elena's throat when the door exploded inward. Not unlocked, not opened. Exploded, the lock mechanism shattering as the door slammed back against the wall hard enough to crack plaster. Tae-hyuk stood in the doorway with his phone in one hand and an expression that made Elena's blood freeze despite the fact that he was there to save her. "Get away from her," Tae-hyuk said, his voice so calm it was terrifying. Damien spun around, surprise flickering across his face before being replaced by irritation. "This is a private family matter. You need to leave before I call security." "Call them?" Tae-hyuk stepped into the room, and Elena saw 2 men follow him inside. One was Jin-woo, the other a stranger with cold eyes and military posture. "I'm sure they'd be very interested in why you just locked yourself in a room with a woman who has an active restraining order against you." "There is no restraining order," Damien said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "There is now." Tae-hyuk held up his phone, showing a document. "Filed 20 minutes ago by Ms. Vale's attorneys. Federal building security has footage of you threatening her tonight. Hospital security has footage of you entering this room and locking the door. And these 2 gentlemen," he gestured to Jin-woo and the stranger, "just witnessed you attempting assault." Damien's face went red. "That's absurd. I'm her employer. I'm trying to help her. She's mentally unstable and—" "She's standing right there," Elena said, her voice shaking but audible. "And she's not crazy." Damien turned to look at her, and Elena saw something crack in his expression. The mask of concern slipping to reveal pure rage underneath. "You stupid bitch. Do you have any idea what you've done? I gave you everything, a job, money, insurance for your dying mother, and this is how you repay me." "You gave me nothing," Elena said, and felt something shift inside her, fear transmuting into fury. "You took everything, my dignity, my freedom, my sense of self. You beat me and threatened me and raped me and told me it was love. I never—" "You did." Elena stepped away from the wall, her whole body shaking. "You did it over and over for 3 years, and you made me think it was my fault, that I was weak, that I deserved it. But I don't deserve it. Nobody deserves what you did to me." "Elena, don't say my name." Her voice broke on the words. "Don't ever say my name again." Damien looked between her and Tae-hyuk, calculation returning to his eyes. "This won't work. I have lawyers, I have money, I have connections that go all the way to the SEC?" Tae-hyuk interrupted. "The Justice Department? Because those connections just became your biggest problem." He nodded to Jin-woo, who pulled out a tablet and turned it to face Damien. Elena couldn't see what was on the screen, but she watched Damien's face go from red to white in the span of 3 seconds. "Where did you get that?" Damien whispered. "From your personal server," Tae-hyuk said. "The one you thought was secure. The one containing every financial crime you've committed in the last 6 years, along with quite a bit of footage from security cameras you installed in your office without anyone's knowledge." Elena felt her stomach drop. "Footage?" "Don't worry," Tae-hyuk said, without looking at her. "I made sure only the relevant evidence was preserved. The rest has been destroyed. Damien was staring at the tablet like it was a bomb. That's illegal. Breaking into private servers is exactly what you did to Elena's apartment tonight, Tae-hyuk finished. How did you know where she hid the backup drive, Damien? Did you hack her phone, install spyware on her computer? Because I have forensic evidence of both. Damien said nothing. It doesn't matter, Tae-hyuk continued, because while you were busy clearing out her apartment, my people were busy copying everything from your systems. Financial records, emails, hidden camera footage, all of it. And in about, he checked his watch, 15 minutes, it's all going to be delivered simultaneously to the SEC, the FBI, the Justice Department, and every major news outlet in New York. You can't do that. I already did. Damien lunged. It wasn't calculated or controlled, just pure animal panic driving him across the room toward Tae-hyuk with hands outstretched. He made it 3 steps before Jin-woo intercepted him, one arm wrapping around Damien's throat while the other pinned his arm behind his back. Damien struggled, face purpling. Let go of me. Let go or I'll... Oh! Dis-moi. You'll what? Tae-hyuk asked, genuinely curious. Call security? Your lawyers? The police? He stepped closer until he was inches from Damien's face. You have no power here. No connections that matter. No leverage. You're just a man who hurt people weaker than himself and got caught. I'll destroy you, Damien spat. I'll find out who you really are and I'm Yoon Tae-hyuk, Tae-hyuk said calmly. Head of Yoon International Holdings. I run shipping operations, real estate acquisitions, and financial services across 6 countries. I'm also... He paused. Let's call it a businessman with unconventional methods. And unlike you, I don't make threats I can't keep. He nodded to Jin-woo, who released Damien. Damien stumbled forward, catching himself against the bed where Elena's mother lay unconscious and unaware. You're going to walk out of this hospital, Tae-hyuk said. You're going to go home, and you're going to wait for the federal agents who will arrive at your door sometime in the next 24 hours. You will not contact Elena. You will not attempt to destroy evidence. You will not do anything except prepare for the fact that your life as you knew it is over. And if I don't? Damien asked, trying to sound defiant but coming across as desperate. Tae-hyuk smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Then you'll learn exactly what happens when you threaten someone under my protection. And trust me, Damien, what the federal government will do to you is mercy compared to what I can do. Damien stared at him for a long moment, then looked at Elena. She met his eyes and saw something she'd never seen before, genuine fear. He was scared. Of Tae-hyuk, of the evidence, of consequences he'd spent years convinced would never touch him. This isn't over, Damien said, but his voice wavered. Yes, Elena said quietly. It is. Damien straightened his jacket with shaking hands, shot one last look at Tae-hyuk that promised future violence, and walked out of the room. The silence he left behind felt like the aftermath of an explosion, ringing ears and shell shock, and the slow realization that somehow, impossibly, she was still alive. Elena's legs gave out. She caught herself against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor with her head between her knees, breathing in short gasps that wouldn't quite become sobs, but weren't far off. Tae-hyuk crouched beside her, maintaining careful distance. Are you hurt? No. Elena lifted her head. How did you know? How did you know he'd come here? Because if I were him, that's what I'd do. Isolate you, corner you, break you down when you were most vulnerable. Tae-hyuk paused. I had Jin-woo follow you from the car. The moment you entered the hospital, we were 30 seconds behind. You were watching me? I was protecting you. There's a difference. Elena wanted to be angry about the surveillance, the invasion of privacy, the assumption that she needed protection. But sitting on a hospital floor after nearly being strangled by her abuser, she found she didn't have the energy for righteous indignation. Is it true? She asked. The evidence? The footage? Yes. How much do you have? Enough to put him away for 20 years. Maybe longer. Elena closed her eyes and felt tears slide down her cheeks. Not sad tears. Not happy tears. Just the kind of tears that came when your nervous system finally realized the danger had passed, and it was safe to fall apart. I need to see it, she said. No, you don't. Yes, I do. Elena opened her eyes and looked at him. I need to see proof that this is real, that I didn't imagine everything. Taehyuk studied her face for a moment, then stood and offered his hand. She took it and let him pull her to her feet. Not here, he said. Somewhere safer. Bats. They went back to the Gramercy safe house. The apartment felt different now, less like a refuge and more like a war room. Taehyuk set up his laptop on the dining table while Jin-woo stood guard at the door, and the other man, whose name Elena learned was Park Min-jae, made coffee that nobody would drink. Before I show you this, Taehyuk said, I need you to understand something. What's on here is evidence in an ongoing federal investigation. If you watch it, you can't unsee it. You'll have to testify about what you saw. You'll have to relive it in court. I'm already going to have to relive it in court, Elena said. At least this way, I'll know I'm not crazy. Taehyuk nodded and opened a folder on his laptop. Inside were hundreds of files, spreadsheets, emails, scanned documents, and several video files with dates going back 3 years. Elena's hands started shaking again. He recorded everything? Hidden cameras in his office, his apartment, even his car. I think he got off on the power of it, knowing he could replay his own dominance whenever he wanted. That's sick. Yes. Taehyuk clicked on one of the video files. Elena recognized the setting immediately. Damien's office, viewed from an angle that suggested the camera was hidden somewhere near the ceiling. The timestamp showed a date from 2 years ago, October 15th. Elena remembered that night. She'd been working late. Everyone else had gone home. Damien had asked her to stay to finalize a presentation for investors. She'd said yes because she always said yes because saying no meant. On the screen past Elena entered the office carrying a laptop. Past Damien closed the door behind her, locked it. I don't need to see this, Elena said, her voice cracking. Taehyuk paused the video. You're right, you don't. But the SEC investigators do. The FBI does. The jury does. And they're going to believe it because it's not your word against his anymore. It's video evidence that he can't deny or explain away. Elena stared at the frozen image on screen, herself at 26, still believing that if she just worked hard enough, complied enough, survived enough, maybe things would get better. Play it, she said. Elena, play it. Taehyuk pressed play. Elena watched herself set down the laptop, watched Damien walk up behind her, watched his hand land on her shoulder while his other hand slid down her back, watched herself go very still in that way prey animals do when predators are too close. You've been avoiding me, past Damien said on the video. I've been busy, past Elena replied, her voice small. Too busy for me? No, I don't like being avoided, Elena. What happened next took 4 minutes. Elena made it through 2 of them before she told Taehyuk to stop the video. She stood up from the table, walked to the bathroom, and vomited into the sink. When she came back out, Taehyuk was closing the laptop. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have… How many of those videos are there? Elena interrupted. 47 that show criminal behavior. Another 100 or so that just show workplace harassment. And you have all of them? Yes? Good. Elena sat back down. Then he's done. He's actually done. Yes. Elena pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the room from spinning. 47 videos. 147 pieces of evidence that what happened to her was real, was documented, was undeniable. I want to call my mother's doctors, Elena said suddenly. It's almost midnight. I don't care. I want to know. She stopped, gathering herself. I want to know what Damien told them. What lies he used to get medical proxy. Taehyuk handed her his phone. Use this. It's secure. Elena dialed St. Catherine's and asked to be connected to the oncology department. It took 3 transfers before she reached someone who could access her mother's file. Yes, Ms. Vale, the doctor said. I have your mother's records here. Can I ask what this is regarding? Damien Roth, Elena said. He claimed he had medical proxy. I need to know on what basis. There was a pause, the sound of paper shuffling. According to the paperwork filed last month, Mr. Roth was granted temporary medical proxy based on your documented mental health issues and inability to make sound decisions regarding your mother's care. Elena's chest tightened. What documented mental health issues? It says here you were hospitalized for... The doctor paused. I'm sorry, Ms. Vale, but this doesn't look right. The documentation is signed by a Dr. William Chen, but we don't have any Dr. Chen on staff at any facility in our network. Because he doesn't exist, Elena said. Damien forged medical documents to get control of my mother's care. Silence on the other end of the line. Ms. Vale, if what you're saying is true, this is a serious matter. Medical fraud, forgery, it's all true. And you're going to receive evidence of it within the next few hours from federal investigators. In the meantime, I need you to revoke Damien Roth's medical proxy immediately and restore it to me. I'll need to verify your identity, and do it now, Elena said, her voice harder than she'd ever heard it. Or I'm calling a lawyer and the medical board and every news outlet in New York to explain how your hospital gave control of a dying woman to her daughter's abuser based on forged documents. Another pause. Then, I'll have the paperwork ready within the hour. You'll need to come sign in person. I'll be there. Elena hung up and looked at Tae-hyuk. He forged medical documents. He literally created a fake doctor to convince the hospital I was incompetent. I know, Tae-hyuk said. It's in the evidence package. How much evidence do you have? Everything. Every crime he's committed in the last 6 years. Financial fraud, securities violations, assault, sexual assault, coercion, medical fraud, illegal surveillance. The SEC and FBI have enough to charge him with 43 separate counts. Elena felt something crack open inside her chest. Not fear this time, but something closer to vindication. 43 counts. Minimum. The number will probably grow as more evidence surfaces. How long? How long what? How long will he go to prison for? Tae-hyuk was quiet for a moment. If they prosecute everything, he'll die there. The word should have brought relief. Instead, Elena felt something more complex. Satisfaction mixed with exhaustion, mixed with a strange emptiness where fear used to live. What happens now, she asked. Now you rest. Tomorrow morning, you meet with the SEC investigators again. This time with evidence that backs up every word you said. You give your full testimony, then the federal prosecutors take over. And me? You testify when they need you to. You rebuild your life. You move forward. Just like that? No, Tae-hyuk said honestly. Not just like that. It will take time. Therapy, probably. Legal proceedings that stretch for months. Media attention once the story breaks. But you'll get through it, because you're stronger than you think. Elena laughed bitterly. I don't feel strong. You walked into a federal building and testified against one of the most powerful men in New York. You fled a psychiatric hold that would have destroyed your credibility. You came back to confront him in your mother's hospital room, knowing he'd be there. That's not weakness, Elena. That's courage. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. Elena looked at the closed laptop, imagining all those videos stored inside. Evidence of the worst moments of her life, preserved forever, soon to be reviewed by investigators and lawyers, and eventually a jury who would judge whether she deserved justice. I'm scared, she admitted. Of what? Of going to court, of having to relive everything in front of strangers, of... She stopped. Of people not believing me anyway. They'll believe you, Tae-hyuk said firmly, because you'll have more than just words. You'll have documentation, video evidence, forensic analysis, and probably a dozen other victims who'll come forward once the story breaks. Other victims? Damien didn't start with you. He won't have stopped with you either if we hadn't intervened. Men like him never stop until they're forced to. Elena thought about Sarah Mitchell with her broken ribs and her $50,000 silence. Thought about the other assistants who'd disappeared into settlements and NDAs. Thought about the women who might have come after her if Tae-hyuk hadn't decided to care about a stranger collapsing in a boardroom. I want to testify, she said. Not just about the financial crimes, about everything. The assault, the coercion, all of it. I want him to know that I'm not afraid of him anymore. Are you sure? No? But I'm doing it anyway. Tae-hyuk smiled slightly. That's the definition of courage, sak. At 3 a.m, Tae-hyuk's phone buzzed. He looked at it, then at Elena. The evidence package just went live. SEC, FBI, Justice Department, and New York Times all received it simultaneously. How long until it breaks publicly? Hours. Maybe less. He paused. You should prepare yourself. Once this story hits, there will be media attention. Reporters will try to find you, interview you, get your side of the story. Let them, Elena said. I'm done hiding. Tae-hyuk studied her face for a moment, then nodded. Okay, but we do this smart. Controlled statements through your lawyers, no surprise interviews, no ambushes. Agreed. His phone buzzed again. Then it started ringing. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted. What? Elena asked. The SEC just arrested Damien at his apartment. Federal agents are executing search warrants at Cross Global headquarters right now. Elena felt her heart stop, then start again in a painful lurch. It's happening. It's actually happening. Yes. What about... She hesitated. What about the other people at Cross Global? The CFO, the executives who knew what was happening? They're all being questioned. Some will cooperate, some won't. But they're all going down with him. Elena thought about the boardroom where she'd collapsed 2 days ago. Thought about the executives who'd watched Damien dismiss her like broken equipment and said nothing. Thought about the complicity of silence, the evil of looking away. Good, she said. Tae-hyuk's phone kept buzzing. He silenced it and set it face down on the table. You should try to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. I can't sleep. Try anyway. Elena stood and walked to the window, pulling back the blinds to look out at the city. Somewhere out there, federal agents were dismantling Damien's empire brick by brick. Somewhere out there, other women who'd suffered in silence were probably watching the news and realizing they weren't alone. Somewhere out there, the world was changing because she'd decided to fight back. Thank you, Elena said without turning around. For what? For believing me. For protecting me. For... Her voice caught. For caring when nobody else did. You're welcome. Elena let the blinds fall closed and turned to face him. I need to ask you something. Okay. Why did you do this? Really? Not the story about watching someone die in Seoul. The real reason. Tae-hyuk was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. Because I've spent 15 years building power through violence and fear. And I wanted to know if that power could be used for something other than destruction. And? I still don't know, he admitted, but helping you felt like a start. Elena crossed the room and, without thinking about it too hard, wrapped her arms around him. Tae-hyuk went rigid with surprise, then slowly, carefully returned the embrace. They stood like that for several seconds, two damaged people holding each other in the aftermath of a war that was finally ending. Then Elena's phone buzzed. She pulled away and looked at it. Her hands started shaking. What? Tae-hyuk asked. Elena showed him the screen. A text from an unknown number. We found 7 more women willing to testify. Damien Roth is finished. Special Agent Webb. She looked up at Tae-hyuk with tears streaming down her face. 7 more. 7 more, he confirmed. Elena sank into the nearest chair and let herself cry. Not from fear or pain or exhaustion, from relief, from vindication, from the overwhelming realization that she'd survived something meant to destroy her, and in surviving, she'd helped destroy it instead. Tae-hyuk sat beside her and waited while she cried herself empty. Outside, dawn was starting to break over New York, gray light spilling across buildings that would wake up to headlines about a fallen CEO and the women brave enough to burn his empire to the ground. And in a safe house in Gramercy, Elena Vale finally understood that sometimes salvation didn't come from being rescued. Sometimes it came from deciding you were worth fighting for. What happens next? She asked when she could breathe again. Tae-hyuk looked at her with something that might have been respect. Now we watch him fall. The New York Times broke the story at 6 in the morning. By 7, every major news outlet in the country had picked it up. By 8, Elena's phone had 17 missed calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten her number despite Tae-hyuk's security measures. She sat on the couch in the Gramercy safe house, staring at her laptop screen where the headline blazed in bold letters. Tech CEO arrested in massive fraud and assault case. Multiple victims come forward. Below it, a photo of Damien being led out of his apartment building in handcuffs, face twisted with rage, expensive suit rumpled for the first time in his life. Elena felt nothing looking at it. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a hollow exhaustion that lived somewhere beneath her ribs where fear used to be. "You should eat something," Taehyuk said from the kitchen. "I'm not hungry." "You haven't eaten in 24 hours. "I know." He brought her toast anyway. Plain, dry, the kind of food you gave people in shock. Elena took it and set it on the table without taking a bite. Taehyuk's phone rang. He answered in Korean, listened for a moment, then switched to English. "She's not making any public statements today. Schedule it for next week." He paused. "I don't care what they're offering. The answer is no." He hung up and looked at Elena. "That was your 5th interview request this morning. You're going to need to decide how you want to handle the media." "I want them to go away." "They won't. Not for a while." Elena pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself small in a way she'd promised herself she'd stop doing, but couldn't quite break the habit of yet. "How long until the trial?" "Months, maybe a year. Federal cases move slowly." "And until then?" "Until then, you live your life." Elena laughed bitterly. "What life? I don't have a job. I don't have an apartment. I don't have anything except a dying mother and enough trauma to fill a psychiatric textbook." "Then you build new things," Taehyuk said simply. "That's what people do after wars. They rebuild." "I don't know how." "Neither did I, but I figured it out." Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the exhaustion carved into his face, the shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept either. "When do you go back to Korea?" "I don't." "What?" "I'm staying until the trial is over, until you're safe." "That's months." "I know." "You can't just put your life on hold for me." "I'm not," Taehyuk said. "I'm making a choice." "There's a difference." Elena wanted to argue but didn't have the energy. Instead, she picked up the toast and forced herself to take a bite. It tasted like cardboard, but she chewed and swallowed anyway because Taehyuk was right. She needed to eat, needed to sleep, needed to do all the small human things that kept people alive even when they didn't particularly want to be. Her phone buzzed, a text from Special Agent Webb. "Need you at the federal building by noon. New evidence surfaced. Bring your lawyer." Elena showed it to Taehyuk. "What new evidence?" "I don't know, but we'll find out." Guides. The federal building felt different in daylight, less ominous, more bureaucratic. Elena sat in the same conference room where she'd given her first testimony, but this time there were more people crowded around the table. Agent Webb and Agent Huang, Rebecca Torres and David Kim, and 3 women Elena had never seen before. "Ms. Vale," Agent Webb said, "thank you for coming. I'd like you to meet Jessica Park, Amanda Lewis, and Sarah Mitchell." Elena's breath caught. Sarah Mitchell. The woman from the photo Taehyuk had shown her. The one with broken ribs and a concussion and $50,000 of hush money. Sarah looked older than her photo, harder, like she'd spent 4 years building armor that didn't quite fit. "You're Elena." "Yes." "I saw your name in the news, saw what you did." Sarah's voice was rough. "I thought I should, I don't know, say thank you maybe." "You don't have to thank me." "Yeah, I do, because you did what I couldn't. You fought back." Elena felt tears building. "I almost didn't." "But you did. That's what matters." Agent Huang cleared her throat. "Ms. Vale, these 3 women have all come forward with testimony about Damien Roth's pattern of abuse. Their accounts corroborate yours in significant ways. We're building a case that demonstrates systematic predatory behavior over at least 8 years. 8 years? Possibly longer. We're still investigating. Agent Webb opened a folder. But that's not why we called you here. We found something else on Damien's servers, something we need you to verify. He slid a document across the table. Elena picked it up and felt her stomach drop. It was a medical report from St. Catherine's Medical Center about her mother. What is this? Elena asked. A falsified prognosis, Agent Webb said. According to the real medical records, your mother's cancer had a 70% survival rate with the treatment she was receiving, but this version, he tapped the document, shows a terminal diagnosis with 0 chance of recovery. Elena's hands started shaking. I don't understand. Damien Roth paid a hospital administrator to create fake medical documents suggesting your mother was dying, Agent Huang explained. He used those documents to keep you compliant, to make you believe that leaving your job would kill your mother. The room tilted. Elena gripped the edge of the table, trying to process information that fundamentally changed everything she'd believed for 2 years. My mother isn't dying? She's sick. But with proper treatment, her doctors believe she has an excellent chance of full recovery. Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at the fake medical report while her brain tried to reconcile 2 years of grief with the possibility of hope. He lied about that too, she whispered. He lied about everything. Yes, Agent Webb said gently. He did. Sarah Mitchell reached across the table and took Elena's hand. He told me my sister would lose her scholarship if I reported him, showed me documents proving she'd plagiarized an essay. I believed him for 3 years before I found out the documents were forged. Jessica Park spoke up. He told me my immigration status was fraudulent, that he'd have me deported if I didn't comply. It wasn't until I hired a lawyer that I learned I was a legal permanent resident. Amanda Lewis said nothing, just stared at her hands with an expression that suggested her story was somehow worse. Elena looked at these 3 women, survivors, warriors, people who'd carried the same weight she had, and felt something shift inside her chest. She wasn't alone, had never been alone, just isolated by a predator who understood that separation was the first step in destruction. What happens now? Elena asked. Now we prosecute him for everything, Agent Webb said. Fraud, assault, coercion, forgery, illegal surveillance, and about 40 other charges. With your testimony and theirs, he gestured to the other women, we have enough to put him away for 30 years minimum. Will you testify? Agent Huang asked, looking at each of them. All of you? Sarah nodded immediately. Jessica took a moment, then nodded too. Amanda hesitated, tears streaming down her face, then whispered, yes. They all looked at Elena. She thought about Damien and his glass tower, about 3 years of systematic destruction, about lies wrapped in concern and violence disguised as love. She thought about her mother lying in a hospital bed with a prognosis that was 80% fabrication. She thought about the other women, the ones who came before, the ones who might have come after. Yes, Elena said. I'll testify. 3 months passed like a fever dream. Elena gave 14 depositions, participated in 6 investigative interviews, and spent countless hours with prosecutors preparing for a trial that kept getting postponed as more evidence surfaced. Damien fought the charges viciously. His lawyers filed motion after motion, challenged every piece of evidence, tried to paint Elena and the other women as vindictive employees seeking attention. But the video footage was undeniable. The financial crimes were documented. The pattern was clear. Cross Global collapsed in spectacular fashion. The board forced Damien to resign. Federal regulators froze all company assets. Employees scrambled for new jobs while investors filed lawsuits, and the media picked apart every detail of the company's fraudulent practices. Elena watched it happen from the sidelines, safe in the Gramercy apartment that had become something like home. Tae Hyuk stayed, as promised, managing his business remotely while ensuring she had everything she needed: lawyers, therapists, security, and a quiet presence that asked for nothing in return. Her mother woke up from the induced coma in week 6. The doctors adjusted her treatment based on the real prognosis, and slowly, painfully slowly, she started improving. Elena visited every day. At first they didn't talk about Damien or Cross Global or the nightmare of the last 3 years. They just sat together while her mother regained strength, and Elena learned how to exist without fear as her constant companion. Then one afternoon, her mother asked the question Elena had been dreading. Did he hurt you? Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then, yes. How badly? Badly. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry. I should have noticed. Should have asked more questions. Should have... You were sick, Elena interrupted gently. You were fighting for your life. You can't blame yourself for not seeing something I worked very hard to hide. But I'm your mother. I should have known. He made sure you wouldn't. That was part of his plan. Elena took her mother's hand. But it's over now. He can't hurt anyone anymore. Because of you. Because of a lot of people. But yeah, partly because of me. Her mother squeezed her hand. I'm proud of you. Elena felt something crack open inside her chest. Not breaking, but opening, like a door she'd kept locked for years finally swinging wide. She leaned forward and let her mother hold her while she cried the kind of tears that were equal parts grief and relief and the slow, painful process of healing. The trial started in March. Federal courthouse, massive media presence, security so tight that Elena needed 3 different credentials just to enter the building. She sat in the witness box with her hands folded in her lap and told her story to a jury of 12 strangers who held Damien's fate in their hands. It took 4 hours. She answered every question her lawyers asked, endured cross-examination from Damien's defense team, and never once looked at the defendant's table where Damien sat in a gray suit looking smaller and older than she remembered. When it was over, Rebecca Torres gave her a small nod that meant she'd done well. Elena stepped down from the witness stand on shaking legs and walked out of the courtroom into a hallway where Tae Hyuk waited. How do you feel? He asked. Empty, Elena said. But in a good way, like I just put down something heavy I'd been carrying too long. That's exactly what you did, Sarah Mitchell testified the next day, then Jessica Park, then Amanda Lewis. Each woman told her story with the kind of raw honesty that made the jury shift uncomfortably in their seats. By the end of week 2, Damien's lawyers were clearly scrambling. Week 3 brought the financial experts who explained Cross Global's fraud in terms even a child could understand. Week 4 brought FBI forensic specialists who walked through the surveillance footage and illegal server access. Week 5 brought character witnesses who testified that Damien Roth was a model citizen who'd never shown any signs of violence. The prosecution tore them apart on cross-examination. Week 6 brought closing arguments. Elena sat in the gallery and watched as federal prosecutors laid out a case so comprehensive, so damning, that even Damien's expensive legal team couldn't find gaps to exploit. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they returned, Elena was back at the safe house eating takeout with Tae Hyuk and trying not to check her phone every 30 seconds. Rebecca Torres called at 7 p.m. Guilty, she said simply. On all 47 counts. Elena dropped the phone. Tae Hyuk caught it, listened to Rebecca for a moment, then hung up and looked at Elena. It's over. All of it? All of it. He's done. Elena sat down slowly on the couch. She'd imagined this moment for months, the relief, the vindication, the sense of justice finally served. But what she felt instead was a strange quiet, like the absence of noise after years of constant screaming. How long? She asked. Sentencing is in 3 weeks, but the prosecutors are asking for maximum 35 years plus restitution. He'll die in prison. Yes. Elena closed her eyes. She should feel triumphant, should feel something larger than this odd emptiness, but all she felt was tired. What happens now? She asked for what felt like the 100th time. Now you decide what you want your life to look like, Tae Hyuk said, because for the first time in 3 years, that choice is entirely yours. Sentencing came on a Thursday in April. Damien Roth, dressed in an orange jumpsuit instead of a tailored suit, stood before the judge and listened to the litany of his crimes. 47 counts, 47 separate acts of harm that had destroyed lives and shattered trust, and demonstrated a pattern of predatory behavior that the judge called among the most egregious I've encountered in 30 years on the bench. The court sentences you to 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, the judge said. You will also pay restitution to your victims in amounts to be determined separately. You used your position of power to prey on vulnerable women, and you used your company to commit systematic fraud. You showed no remorse, no accountability, and no recognition of the harm you caused. This sentence reflects the severity of your crimes and the need to protect society from further harm. Damien said nothing, just stood there while bailiffs prepared to escort him out of the courtroom for the last time as a free man. Elena watched from the gallery, flanked by Sarah Mitchell on one side and Tae Hyuk on the other. She waited to feel something, anger, satisfaction, relief, anything. But all she felt was the quiet understanding that this chapter was finally, definitively closed. As Damien was led away, he turned and looked directly at her. Their eyes met for 3 seconds that stretched like hours. Elena saw rage in his expression and disbelief, and the kind of bitter resentment that came from someone who'd never imagined consequences could actually touch him. She didn't look away, didn't flinch, just held his gaze until he was the one who broke eye contact and turned away. Then he was gone, disappeared through a door that led to transport vehicles and a prison cell and the rest of his miserable life. Sarah squeezed Elena's hand. "We did it." "Yeah," Elena said quietly. "We did." Spring turned to summer. Elena moved out of the Gramercy safe house into a small apartment in Brooklyn with windows that overlooked a park instead of glass towers. Her mother was discharged from St. Catherine's in June, cancer in remission, prognosis excellent. They lived together for a while, relearning each other, rebuilding trust that Damien's lies had fractured, filling the silence with conversations they should have had years ago. Elena started therapy. Twice a week at first, then once a week as the nightmares became less frequent and the panic attacks stopped ambushing her in grocery stores and on subway platforms. She learned to recognize triggers, developed coping strategies, and slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, started feeling like a person instead of a collection of survival instincts. She got a job at a small publishing house in September. Nothing glamorous, just an assistant editor position that paid enough to cover rent and groceries and the slow rebuilding of a life. Her boss was a woman in her 60s who asked direct questions and accepted honest answers, and never once made Elena feel like she needed to be anything other than herself. Taehyuk returned to Seoul in October. His business requiring attention he could no longer provide remotely. But he came back every few months, staying in a hotel nearby, taking Elena to quiet restaurants where they talked about everything except the trial. "You're different," he said one evening over Thai food that was too spicy for either of them, but they ate anyway. "Different how?" "Lighter, like you're not carrying the weight anymore." Elena thought about it. "I think I just learned to distribute it better. It's still there, the trauma, the memories, all of it. But it's not crushing me anymore. That's growth. That's survival." "Sometimes they're the same thing," Elena smiled. "You sound like my therapist." "Your therapist sounds smart." "She is." Elena set down her chopsticks. "I've been thinking about something." "What?" "Writing a book. About what happened. Not for revenge or exposure or any of that, just I think other people need to know they're not alone. That fighting back is possible even when it seems impossible." Taehyuk was quiet for a moment. "That's brave. Or stupid. We've had this conversation before. I maintain they're often the same thing." Elena laughed. A real laugh, the kind that came from genuine amusement instead of nervous habit. "Will you help me? With the parts about your investigation? The technical stuff I don't understand?" "Of course. It won't be comfortable, reliving all of it." "Nothing worth doing is comfortable," Taehyuk said. "But you already know that." The book took 18 months to write. Elena poured everything into it. The fear, the shame, the slow climb from victim to survivor to someone who could look back at her own story without drowning in it. She interviewed the other women, consulted with the prosecutors, and made sure every detail was accurate even when accuracy hurt. She titled it Glass Towers, after the building where her nightmare began and the transparency required to break through silence. It published in March, 3 years after Damien's arrest. The launch event was at a small bookstore in Manhattan, crowded with people Elena had never met but who understood exactly what she'd survived. Sarah Mitchell introduced her. Her mother sat in the front row crying proud tears. Taehyuk stood in the back, watching with that same quiet intensity he'd brought to everything since the day they met. Elena read the opening chapter, the one about collapsing in the boardroom, about a Korean investor who noticed bruises everyone else ignored, about the moment her life split into before and after. When she finished, the room was silent for 3 heartbeats. Then applause erupted, and Elena understood that this sharing of truth, this refusal to stay silent, was its own kind of justice. 4 years after the trial, Elena stood in front of St. Catherine's Medical Center with her mother, who was now cancer-free and looked younger than she had in a decade. They were there for a ceremony, a plaque being installed in the main lobby, funded by settlement money from Cross Global's bankruptcy proceedings. The plaque read, "In recognition of survivors of workplace abuse and in memory of those who didn't survive." May truth always triumph over power. Below it, in smaller text, funded by the Cross Global Settlement Fund, established 2027. Elena touched the cold metal and thought about the women who'd testified, the women who'd stayed silent, the women who might never come forward but who deserved to know they weren't alone. "You did good," her mother said quietly. "We did good," Elena corrected. "All of us." They stood there for a few more minutes, then walked out into afternoon sunlight that felt warmer than it had any right to be in March. Tae-hyuk was waiting by his car. He'd flown in from Seoul the day before, dropping everything when Elena called to ask if he'd attend the ceremony. He wore a dark suit and that same unreadable expression that had once frightened her but now felt like safety. "Coffee?" he asked. "Coffee," Elena agreed. They drove to a quiet cafe in Brooklyn, the kind of place that served good coffee and didn't care about anything except the quality of the beans. They sat by the window and watched people pass by. Students, professionals, parents with strollers, all those lives moving forward in their own complicated ways. "I've been offered a position," Elena said, "running a nonprofit that helps abuse survivors navigate the legal system." "Are you taking it?" "I think so. It's terrifying. Most worthwhile things are." Elena smiled. "You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being true." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw exhaustion that probably mirrored her own, scars that didn't show but existed nonetheless, and a determination to keep moving forward despite everything. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me when everyone else looked away. For believing me when I didn't believe myself. For—" her voice caught. "For caring about a stranger collapsing in a boardroom." Tae-hyuk was quiet for a long moment. "You were never a stranger, Elena. You were someone who needed help. That's all that mattered." "Is that why you stayed, all these years?" "I stayed because you reminded me that power doesn't have to be destructive, that sometimes you can use it to protect instead of harm." He paused. "You changed my life too, made me think about what kind of person I want to be." Elena felt tears building but blinked them away. She'd cried enough. Now was the time for living. "Will you come to the nonprofit launch?" she asked. "Next month?" "I'll be there." "You don't have to." "I know, but I want to." They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, watching the city move around them while they sat in their small pocket of peace. Eventually, Tae-hyuk had to leave for the airport, and Elena had to get back to her apartment where manuscript edits waited and phone calls needed returning, and life continued its forward march. But before they parted, Elena did something she'd been thinking about for months. She kissed him. Not desperately or passionately, just a soft press of lips that said thank you and goodbye and maybe something more complicated that neither of them was quite ready to name. Tae-hyuk looked surprised, then smiled. "What was that for?" "For being exactly who I needed when I needed it most." "Elena, I know. You're leaving. I'm healing. The timing is terrible." She stepped back. "But I wanted you to know that when I think about my life now, about everything I've built and everything I'm becoming, you're part of that foundation. You always will be." Tae-hyuk reached out and touched her cheek gently. "You saved yourself, Elena. I just gave you the tools." "Then thank you for the tools." He left. Elena watched his car disappear into traffic, then turned and walked toward the subway that would take her home. She had a life to live now, a real one, built on truth instead of fear, sustained by strength she hadn't known she possessed. Damian Roth was in prison where he'd die old and forgotten. Cross Global was dissolved, its assets distributed to victims and creditors. And Elena Vale, survivor, author, advocate, was finally, impossibly free. Boom. 5 years after the collapse, Elena stood on a stage in front of 300 people at a conference for workplace abuse survivors. She wore a blue dress that wasn't too tight, shoes that didn't hurt, and an expression that had taken thousands of hours of therapy to achieve. "My name is Elena Vale," she said into the microphone, "and I'm here to tell you that survival is possible. Healing is possible. Justice is possible. It won't be easy. It won't be fast. But it's possible." She told her story, the abbreviated version now, practiced and polished but still true. She talked about glass towers and locked doors and a Korean investor who'd taught her that power could be protective instead of predatory. She talked about the other women, the trial, the long road from victim to survivor to someone who could stand in front of a crowd and speak without her voice shaking. "I'm not going to tell you it gets better," she said toward the end, "because sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the nightmares persist and the triggers remain and the damage feels permanent. But what I will tell you is this: you are not alone. You are not broken, and you are worth fighting for." The applause was thunderous. Elena stepped off the stage and immediately found herself surrounded by people who wanted to share their stories, ask questions, just touch her arm and say thank you for speaking truth. She listened to each one, gave each person her full attention, and tried to offer the hope she'd once desperately needed someone to give her. Later, standing outside the venue with Sarah Mitchell and Jessica Park, Elena looked up at the sky and thought about how far they'd all come. About the women who'd testified, and the women who'd stayed silent, and the women who'd never gotten the chance to tell their stories because their predators had won. "We should do something," Sarah said suddenly, "for them, the ones who didn't make it." "Like what?" Jessica asked. "I don't know. A memorial maybe, or a scholarship fund? Something that says their lives mattered." Elena thought about it. "A foundation. We could create a foundation in their names, use settlement money to fund legal support for survivors who can't afford it." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Yes, that's perfect." They spent the next hour planning it, 3 women who'd survived hell and decided to turn their survival into something larger than themselves. By the time they parted ways, they had a name, a mission statement, and a determination to make sure no one else fell through the cracks the way they almost had. Elena went home to her apartment where her mother was cooking dinner and her cat was sleeping on the windowsill and everything was quiet and safe and hers. She thought about Tae Hyuk, who texted earlier to say he was proud of her speech, even though he'd watched it via live stream from Seoul. She thought about Damien, who was probably in a cell somewhere, thinking about all the power he'd lost. She thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago, terrified, trapped, convinced she deserved the violence being inflicted on her. And she thought about the woman she'd become, scarred but standing, damaged but determined, broken in places but healing in others. Salvation hadn't come from a hero in shining armor. It had come from a dangerous man willing to burn an empire to the ground for a woman nobody else noticed was suffering. But more importantly, it had come from Elena herself, from the decision to fight back, to tell the truth, to believe that she was worth saving even when everything else said she wasn't. She walked to her window and looked out at Brooklyn stretching toward Manhattan's glittering skyline. Somewhere in that sprawl of buildings and lives, other women were probably suffering right now. Other predators were probably convinced they'd never face consequences. But Elena had proven that glass towers could shatter, that powerful men could fall, that survival was not just possible, but inevitable for anyone brave enough to reach for it. She picked up her phone and sent a message to Tae Hyuk. "Thank you for everything. Always." His response came 3 minutes later. "You're welcome. For everything. Always." Elena smiled, set down her phone, and went to have dinner with her mother. The war was over. The rebuilding continued, and for the first time in years, Elena Vale looked toward the future without fear, because she'd learned the most important lesson anyone could learn. Sometimes the person who saves you is yourself. You just need someone to believe in you long enough for you to start believing too.